This video is an introduction to the formal proofwriting process that we're going to be engaging in for the rest of the year. And what is a proof is a question that you might ask. A proof is a formal argument or a step-by-step process justifying why things are what they are. That's kind of it in a nutshell. It's a detailed or a very formal way of outlining an explanation. Just a reminder to you as we work through these that you can make no assumptions from the way things look in the picture, but rather you need to use the given information together with your knowledge about geometry in order to be able to draw conclusions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get right into this. I'm going to take a look at this first picture where I'm given that segment AR is perpendicular to segment CB. Remember that upside down T symbol makes perpendicular or means perpendicular or making right angles. So I'm going to go to the picture, and where segment AR intersects with segment CB, I'm going to go ahead and draw in those right angles. And based upon my knowledge of geometry, I know that all right angles are congruent. So I'm going to label those 1 and 2 because I know they're congruent to one another. In the second given, we're told that segment AR bisects angle ACAB. Remember that bisect means to split into two equal parts. So what's being split into two equal parts here is angle CAB. So my next move is going to be to go to find angle CAB up in the picture. And angle CAB is that one up at the top. That red segment AR is splitting that green angle into two equal parts. So I'm going to call them 3 and 4. And at this point, I've now labeled all of the given information in my diagram. My next move is going to be to try to justify or show, using one of these three ideas, why the two triangles are congruent. Well, in looking at the first one, side, 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 I don't have three pairs of congruent sides. In order to be able to say that they're congruent by side, angle, side, I'd have to have two pairs of congruent sides in the included angle. I don't have that. And in order to have angle, side, angle, I'd have to have two pairs of congruent angles in the pair of included sides, but I don't have that either. So I'm now going to go back to the picture, and I'm going to ask myself, are there any vertical angles in the picture that I can label? And the answer to that is no. Are there any pairs of shared sides? And the answer to that would be yes. The shared pair AR up the middle is a side in the triangle on the left as well as a side in the triangle on the right. So now revisiting my methods of proving triangles congruent, I don't have three pairs of congruent sides. I don't have two pairs of congruent sides in the included angle, but I do have two pairs of angles in the included pair of sides. So my method or my plan is going to be to use angle, side, angle. I am always going to write a plan or an outline for my proof. So I'm going to plan to make these triangles congruent by angle, side, angle. My first pair of congruent angles are 3 and 4 up at the top. My pair of congruent sides are AR, congruent to itself, right up the middle. And my second pair of congruent angles are those right angles down at the base of the triangle, 1 and 2. So what the plan does is it helps me outline exactly what it is I'm going to have to talk about in my proof. I'm going to have to justify or explain in a step-by-step fashion why angle 3 is congruent to angle 4, why segment AR is congruent to itself, and why angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So I knew angle 3 was congruent to angle 4 because of the bisector. That's where I'm going to start. So every proof is going to include both a statement. The statement is going to be the true piece of information, and a reason. The reason is going to be the how I know it's true. So I can't come right out and say angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. I knew that those two were congruent because I started with this given piece of information about segment AR bisecting angle CAB. So that's where I'm going to begin the writing in my proof. Segment AR bisects angle CAB. I know this is a true statement because it's given to me to be a true statement. So I'm going to put a bubble around the statement AR bisects angle CAB. You're going to bubble that in on yours also. And then underneath you're going to write the given. And because segment AR bisects angle CAB, I know that angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. So the conclusion that I can draw, I'm going to put in my next step of my flow proof. And the reason I know that that's congruent is because the bisector made the two congruent parts. And that is the first pair of congruent angles that I needed to talk about in my proof in order to establish the congruency of the triangles. So this step has now been done. My next item that I want to mention in my proof is the fact that segment AR is congruent to itself. This is in no way, shape, or form related to the bisector. It's another idea completely independent. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start a new branch of my tree. And I'm going to say segment AR is congruent to segment AR. It's a pair of congruent sides, so I'm going to indicate that with a little s in parentheses. And I know those segments are congruent to itself because of a property called the reflexive property. The reflexive property says any geometric shape is congruent to itself. So any line segment is congruent to itself, any angle is congruent to itself. That's kind of intuitive. And then lastly, before I can conclude that these triangles are congruent, I need to talk about angle 1 being congruent to angle 2. But if I go back to the given pieces of information, I wasn't given that. I knew those angles were congruent because they were right angles formed by the perpendicular lines, or it was those perpendicular lines that led me to being able to conclude that the angles were congruent. So I'm going to start off by talking about the perpendicular lines. So segment AR is perpendicular to CB. I know that's a true statement because it's given. So again, my reason or my statement goes in the bubble, my reason goes underneath. And then because those two are perpendicular, so I'm going to draw a little branch off of there, because those two are perpendicular, I know that angles 1 and 2 are right angles. So my statement is that they're right angles. I know that that statement is a true statement because of the fact that perpendicular lines make right angles. And now, once I know that they're both right angles, I can go ahead and from there draw the conclusion that angle 1 must be congruent to angle 2. And again, that's my pair of congruent angles, so I'll label that with an A in parentheses. And I know that's a true statement because all right angles are congruent. And so now I've talked about my first pair of congruent angles, my pair of congruent sides, my second pair of congruent angles. I know these triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. So I'm going to draw all three of these statements together. And when I put all three of those together, I can go ahead and draw the conclusion that triangle ACR is congruent to triangle ABR. And the reason for that, or the reason that makes them congruent, is my angle side angle. Phew. All right, so that's kind of a lot to bite off in one 10-minute video. That was an enormous amount of information. If you understand everything that I just did, you're way smarter than I was when I was in high school. I'm going to say let's take a minute to catch our breath. And then what I want you to do for the second part of this, all I want you to do is I want you to mark the diagram and mark the diagram completely. And when you come back to class, we'll sit down and we'll write this proof together so that unlike the first one, you'll be able to ask questions as we run through the proof writing process because this is completely brand new and you're going to have a lot of questions. I would be really, really surprised if you didn't. All right, so tough video here today, folks. My thanks, my gratitude for sticking with it this long and persevering with it. And know that when you come back to class, I'm here to help you with all of these proofwriting questions that you're likely to have.